Today I am bringing you the mid-year book freakout tag where I talk about my favourite books of the year, my least favourite books of the year and everything in between. So if you are new to BookTube, if you have never heard of this tag, it was originally created by Ellie from Earl Grey Books and Chami, who I don't believe is making content anymore. I've also taken a few questions from Gavin at Gavin Reads It All. Everyone will be linked in the description just in case you would like to check out their channels, but I've also changed the order around a little bit because I want to end with my favourite book of the year, and that's usually one of the earlier questions. The first question that I'm going with is, how is your reading going so far this year? And I'm going to take this opportunity to share some reading stats. So as of right now, at the time of filming, I've read 51 books. As of the end of June, which was the actual midpoint of the year, I'd read 50 books, which is pretty cool considering my goal for the year is 100 books. I always say quality over quantity, so I think it's important to also look up how many 4 stars or 5 stars I've given this year, and around half of the books that I've read have been 4 stars. I've also given 11 books 5 stars, which I think is pretty great. And according to my spreadsheet, I've only given one book 2 stars. It's actually 2, so I don't know what's happened there. Maybe one of the books I gave 2.5 and it rounded up for my spreadsheet. But yeah, there's not been many books that I've actually hated this year. My most read genres are mystery, thriller, and fantasy, and everything else is a broad mix of different genres like romance, lit fic, sci-fi, etc. I love this because I love reading broadly. I love reading across different genres. I feel it keeps things interesting and it helps me avoid falling into a reading slump. I haven't been doing as well with reading series though this year. I've only read 15 books that are part of series and 7 that are like companion novels. Most of the books that I've been reading are standalones, and a lot of that is because I was concentrating on 2 very big series for the first half of this year, and one of those series I have now completed, so that's going to free up some of my time. Next question is, what is the worst book that you've read so far this year? We're going to start with some more negative questions so I can move into the more positive questions for the next part of the video, but my worst book so far this year is The Crash by Frida McFadden, which is the only book that I've given like a full 2 stars. I also rated The Ministry of Time by Callie-Anne Bradley a 2.5. It was basically a 2. The Crash was one of the first books actually I read this year. I read it back in January, and look, I wasn't expecting to love it, but this in my opinion was kind of boring for the whole middle part. As a brief synopsis, you're following a woman who is 8 months pregnant. She gets into a car accident and is saved by this guy. The plan is that his wife is going to nurse her back to health until they can get her to a hospital. Too early on, you get more information than the main character has, and so for a large part of the book, the main character assumes something that is completely wrong, and as the reader, you know that she's wrong, and you're just going around and around in circles, and I just found it so frustrating. Also, I hate the ending. Like, I can't go into details because of spoilers, but yeah, hated the ending, gave it 2 stars. Ministry of Time was the other book that I mentioned. This starts off as a sci-fi and it has a really interesting premise. It's following a woman who moves to a different part of the government, this new team, I guess you could call it, where essentially the government have discovered time travel. So they've brought forward a bunch of people from the past, and our main character is meant to be watching one of these people as like a companion. I thought this was going to be about how time travel has affected these people. That was kind of the setup, but it's not really. There was a moment where one of these people from the past, because all of them were brought forward because they died in the past, this one character is reflecting on how they feel this pressure to do something meaningful now that they've been given a second chance, and I wanted more of that, but instead this started to become a romance, and then it ended up as a thriller, and the main theme of the book I felt was very much shoehorned in. So yeah, I didn't leave this one with a positive opinion, but it wasn't as bad as The Crash. Let's just leave it as that. Next question is your biggest disappointment, and for this I've got a few answers. Gifted and Talented by Livy Blake, I DNF'd at the halfway point because I was just a little bit bored and I felt like I'd got everything out of the book that I needed to at that point. It was very character driven and I didn't feel like I needed to read another 250 pages of no plot. It was disappointing because I loved the Atlas trilogy by Livy Blake, so I did have reasonable expectations going in. Then The Baby Dragon Cafe, I thought this was going to be so good because the cover is adorable, but I got a few chapters in and it felt very immature, the writing, and it felt more like a contemporary romance, whereas I wanted like a cozy fantasy and it wasn't giving me those vibes. The main book I've been most disappointed with this year though is With a Vengeance by Riley Sager. I actually have a whole video review of this if you want to check it out. This I was hoping to love because I've loved Riley Sager's books in the past. I actually quite enjoyed his last release, Middle of the Night, which I know a few people found a bit underwhelming. This was so underwhelming. It had a really strong premise. We're following a woman who brings together the people that she holds responsible for destroying her family. They're traveling on this train going to Chicago. It's an overnight trip, and then there's a murderer on board and it turns into this murder mystery. I thought it had some interesting twists, but then it does this thing towards the end where it's twist after twist after twist, and I was getting whiplash, and I thought, why could you not just focus on one or two really good twists? Why do we have to have one thing after another? It was fine. It was gripping and engaging. I didn't hate my time reading it, but I gave it a very average 3 stars by the end. Next question is my biggest surprise, and for this I've gone with The Centre by Aisha Manazir Siddiqui. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this because it has a fairly low average rating on Goodreads. I think it has something like a 3.4. So I went in with middle expectations, but I really enjoyed this. It follows a main character called Anissa, who is a translator, and she finds out about this place called The Centre where you go and you pay a lot of money, you stay for 10 days, and by the end they promise to make you fluent in any language of your choosing. You just have to follow all of their rules. So she ends up going to this centre, and yeah, it's a discussion and a commentary on language and translation. It also has this very unsettling vibe, and I loved the atmosphere. I listened to the audiobook and I thought it was really well narrated. This surprised me, not just because I enjoyed it so much more than I was expecting, but also because there was some surprising stuff that happened in this book. I started off thinking, why is this categorised as horror? And then I got to the end and realised, yeah, that's why it's categorised as horror. I would say this leans more literary fiction than horror though, just to set expectations. It has horrifying elements, but it feels like a lit fic book in my opinion. Next question is your favourite book by a debut author, and for this I've gone with Experienced by Kate Young. This is following a woman who she has a girlfriend. She came out later in life and immediately got into this relationship where she feels really happy until her girlfriend turns around to her at the start of the book and says, I feel guilty that you haven't had that experience of dating multiple women, so I think we should take a break so you can go out and experience that, and then when we reunite I'll know for definite, I'll feel more secure that you actually want to be with me and you're not just with me because I'm the first woman that you've been with. The setup had me feeling a little bit nervous, however I thought this was a really well written literary romance. I thought that the character relationships in this were done really well. They felt like real people. It's set in Bristol and it has that vibe. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like a realistic portrayal of friendships and relationships. I also loved how the main character's friends weren't afraid to call her out. She makes mistakes throughout this book and her friends actually say to her, yeah, you shouldn't have handled it like that. I think you should have done this, or have you actually thought about how your actions are going to impact this person? We'll definitely be looking out for more books by this author. Next question is your favourite book by an author who's new to you, and I have a few answers to this question. The first is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This messed with my brain. I put off reading this, even though a few people had recommended it to me. I was worried it was going to be a bit too sci-fi, and it is a sci-fi thriller, but I would say it's more of a thriller than sci-fi. Like, if you've watched a Marvel movie, then I think you'll be okay with the level of sci-fi in this. As a brief synopsis, we're following a guy who wakes up after something traumatic happens to him, and his life is no longer his own. He's no longer married to his wife, his son doesn't exist, and it's his desperate mission, is that the word I want to use? It's his desperation to get back to that life and his wife. It's really action-packed. If you love an action-packed thriller that literally does not stop, the pacing in this is is just so consistent. It just moves so quickly. It had me gripped. I listened to the audiobook and I was trying to find excuses to carry on listening, which is how I know I'm loving an audiobook. There was actually a point that I got to where I knew it was going to be 5 stars. It was kind of a 4, and then I got to a point where I thought, whoa, okay. And I mentioned it to my partner because he's also read this book. That was actually the same part that made him realise it wasn't going to be a 5 stars for him. And I found that so interesting how we can have different views on books. But yeah. 5 stars. Would like to read more books by Blake Crouch. I don't know which to try next because I don't think I've heard anything about his other books, but let me know if you've read any of them and what you would recommend reading next. I completely forgot to mention Annie Bot by Sierra Greer was my other answer to this question. This is a speculative novel. It's marketed as sci-fi. I would say it's just speculative. It's a very accessible look and exploration of the ethics of AI, told from the perspective of a woman called Annie, who is a cuddle bunny robot. She's in this abusive relationship with her owner Doug. I had such a visceral experience reading this. My memory of finishing this book and how I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks afterwards, I can't believe I forgot to mention it. So I wanted to insert a little clip here just to let you know that this is probably going to be one of my favourite books of the year, but it was a difficult read, very heavy and really impactful. This next question, I wasn't sure how to phrase. I've wrote best written romantic relationship. There's a question on the original tag, which is your new fictional crush, and I didn't really have an answer for that, so I wanted to talk about something relationship focused, specifically romantic relationship focused. And this relationship in this book, it is not aspirational, okay? It's toxic, but it was so addictive to read about, and that is The Favourites by Lane Fargo. This is following 2 ice dancers and their relationship over time. You meet them when they're teenagers and they're already in a relationship. It's inspired by Wuthering Heights, which I read when I was a teenager. I should probably reread it. I mean, I would love to reread it now and see how the source material was adapted into this kind of retelling, but the drama in this, it was so addictive. It also has multimedia elements because essentially these 2 characters, and specifically the main character Kat, is very driven and ambitious, and she will do anything to reach their goals. You have these multimedia elements where it's essentially interviews with people who knew Kat and Heath at the time. It was just so well constructed, in my opinion. It kind of rises the tension, the atmosphere and the intensity just rises and rises to this crescendo, and you can tell that Lane Fargo has written thrillers in the past. They wrote They Never Learn, which I enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars, but this was even better in my opinion. Do want to clarify though that the relationship is toxic and codependent and not healthy, but I very much enjoyed reading about it. I thought I was going to be okay to film today because it's been a little bit cooler than it has all week, but apparently it's too hot for my camera because it just overheated. Hopefully we're all good now. I've left it to cool down for about half an hour and we're going to get back into the questions. So next up is your newest favourite character. For this I've decided to go with characters that I thought were fascinating or well written rather than like I was obsessed with them. Minako Kaji in Butter by Asako Yuzuki I thought was a really interesting character, especially because you don't ever get her perspective. You see her from the perspective of a journalist who's writing a story about her because Minako Kaji is in prison accused of murdering several men. This has a lot of social commentary about culture in Japan, about misogyny and sexism. I just thought it was really well done and it was really thought-provoking. I also thought James by Percival Everett had a really interesting main character. I felt like I knew him by the end of the book and I would be interested in reading more by this author. This is a reimagining of the Tales of Huckleberry Finn, which I've never read. I was still able to enjoy the book anyway, even though I didn't have that reference. Next question is a book that made you cry, and for this it could only be Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This made me ugly cry. I got to the end of the book and I just stared into the void because it was just so emotionally impactful. This is following a main character who is one of the first women to join the space shuttle program at NASA, and it was the quieter moments as well as the big intense moments that really affected me. The women who are part of this program feel a responsibility responsibility to do well because they're paving the way for future generations, and they feel this pressure, and that people are looking at them as representatives of all women rather than as individuals. And yeah, it was great. It's also a beautiful love story, and parts of the love story also affected me emotionally. So this is the main book that made me sob this year. I also want to give a shout out to My Grandmother Sends Her Regards and Apologies by Frederick Backman, because that also made me cry. Next question is a book that made you happy, and I had to choose Vera Wong's Guide to Snooping by Jessie Q Satanto. This is the sequel to Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers, which was one of my favourite books of last year. I didn't love the sequel as much as the first book, I think because some of the humour felt a little bit forced. Like there's parts where the main character Vera, it's said that she doesn't understand something when she clearly would understand it, and I felt like that was played too much for comedic effect. But I still love Vera as a character. She lives in San Francisco, she owns a tea shop, and she enjoys solving crimes. If you love found family, highly recommend. The found family aspect in this series, I think, is the standout aspect to me. I could have given Vera Wong as my answer to the favourite character question, but I think I said that last year, so I wanted to give a different answer. But this is a book and a series that makes me happy, and if there's a third book, I will definitely be reading it. Next question is the most beautiful book you've received or bought this year, and for this I've gone with Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. This is one of my favourite books of the year, but I decided to use it for this particular question because this edition, in my opinion, is stunning. I do like the original version, which it kind of has that colour scheme, but I think this is just a bit more in keeping with the tone of the book, just in my opinion. I like the more muted tones, and I love the stenciled edges. We have beautiful end paper art, and there's also a design on the hardback as well. This is just such a great book. It's been marketed as Toxic Lesbian Vampires, and if you hear that and think, okay, I'm intrigued, if you like slow, character-driven books where you follow characters over a long period of time, add this to your radar, because this was fantastic, and it was an easy 5 stars. I actually have a reading vlog where I read this, so I'll leave that linked if you are interested in hearing my full thoughts as I was reading it. Next question is your favourite sequel that you've read so far this year, and for this I decided to go with Tower of Dawn by Sarah J Maas. This is the penultimate book, I hope I've used the right word there. This is the second to last book in the Throne of Glass series, and it follows my favourite character. It's kind of like a side quest within the series, and I loved how the pace was just a little bit slower. It wasn't as intense in terms of the action, and yeah, I liked all the new characters that were introduced. It's also, in my opinion, a beautiful love story. Throne of Glass took up a lot of my time at the start of this year, so I wanted to acknowledge that with my favourite book from that series. I have now finished it, and if you have read this series and you want all of my spoilery thoughts, then I'll leave that vlog linked in the cards and in the description. That brings us to the ultimate question, which is, what is the best book that you've read so far this year? So I've already talked about some of my best books of the year, okay? If we had to choose one, it would probably be Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. But a book that I wanted to talk about that I couldn't fit into any other question was A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is the first book in the Wayfarers series, which is a cozy sci-fi series that had been on my radar for a while. I can remember someone recommended this to me when I was saying that I wanted to get into sci-fi, and I should have picked it up sooner because I loved it. It's a book about found family. We're following the crew that are working on this ship, and their job is to punch holes through the galaxy to allow for better transport. It's not really about the plot. I thought the world building was really interesting. Do you still say world building for sci-fi? I don't know. But I thought that the society and the way that it was built, how you had these different characters that were different species and how they were having to work out the best way of communicating with each other, the cultural clashes and things like that, just the characters, okay? The characters were incredible, and I really hope I'm able to continue this series soon. Even though the plot does kind of wrap up in this first book, I believe the second book follows side characters, or a side character from the first book, and it goes from there. Next question is a new release you haven't read yet but want to. I have a few. So My Friends by Frederick Backman, one of my favourite authors. This came out very recently, so it's not too big of a deal that I haven't got around to it yet, Same with The Poppy Fields by Nikki Erlich. This is by the same author as The Measure, one of my favourite books of last year. The main book that I am honestly shocked I haven't read it yet is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the new Hunger Games book. Everyone seemed to be reading this the week it came out, and I almost caved and I almost abandoned my TBR in order to read it, but I thought, no, I'm gonna wait until I'm ready to read it. I'm hoping at some point this will pop up in a Kindle deal because it's quite expensive on Kindle at the moment and I don't want to buy a hardback, but eventually I will pick this up and hopefully it will be this year. Next question is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of this year? I made a whole video about this recently, so I'm not gonna go into too long of a list because I don't want to be repeating myself. I'll leave that video linked if you want to check it out, but my most anticipated release, if I had to choose just one, I'd probably say The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk by Carissa Broadbent. This is the next instalment in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. This is technically the fourth book, but it's the second book in this latest duology, and I gave the first book 5 stars. In fact, I think I've given every book in this series either 4.5 or 5 stars, so this is a 5-star prediction. I'm hoping it delivers. I'm hoping that the romantic tension continues, and I'm hoping that we get some great world building type stuff and plot. Based on the way that the last book ended, it's going to be really interesting to see how this little duology wraps up. The final question is, any other books you want or need to read before the end of the year? I made a video at the start of this year where I was talking about the 10 series I want to prioritise in 2025, and I haven't done the best job with that. I have now finished the Throne of Glass series, as I said. I've also been making progress in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Stephen Erickson, but looking at that list, the next 3 series I really want to start are The Final Strife by Sarah El-Arifi, The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin, one of my favourite authors, and The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, who is an author that I've never read from before, but I've heard this is a really good political fantasy, and that's my kind of fantasy. That is also the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. If you would like to leave your answers to any of these questions in the description, then please feel free. Let me know in particular your favourite book of the year, if you can pick just one. If you can't, leave me a top 3 or a top 5. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.